Terrific. Welcome everybody to Mount Aloysius College. Welcome to our 9th annual Moral Choices lecture. Welcome to our year in the good life, which has been our theme all this year at the college. I think Mount Aloysius is fairly unique in the annals of higher education institutions anyway, in that we choose a theme each year. And we try to build a lot of activities around that theme, from orientation through our speaker series. Even our Little People's Place gets in the act, and they try to teach everyone something around that single idea. And our theme this year has been the good life. The Greek word eudaimonia is commonly interpreted as happiness. Its root words are significant. Eu for good, and daimon for spirit. When Aristotle, Epictetus, and the Stoics began parsing this notion of eudaimonia, they aligned it with Latin words for character and argued that eudaimonia signified not just happiness, but the highest human good. There's a long history of intellectual and moral thought on this idea of the good life. We had a short course in that thought in our fall honors lecture from Dr. Larry Jackson on the pursuit of happiness from Aristotle to America. And there is an American history to this idea as well. The Declaration of Independence gave us a signature definition of the good life as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Whatever the intent, in 1776, public policy discussions of the good life today tend to focus far more on metrics like economic growth and average annual consumption than on any values like happiness or the common good or even liberty. In fact, at this point in our approach to the theme, sometimes it's easier for us to identify what isn't the good life. It's not fame or wealth or celebrity, or a new word, celebritude, which I think means being famous just for being famous. In Mahatma Gandhi's pursuit of peace, he actually identified a litany of destructive traits that he viewed as the polar opposite of the good life. His 7 social sins included wealth without work, pleasure without conscience, science without humanity, knowledge without character, politics without principle, commerce without morality, and worship without sacrifice. Many of you have had the opportunity to follow in the footsteps of some of these giants on the theme in your classes, through our speaker series, through a recent exercise where we even tried to define what is the good life by the decades. And we had a lot of fun trying to figure out what's the good life in the 1960s compared to the good life, say, in the 1990s. And undoubtedly, part of the good life for each of us lies in our interactions with others and how much of our own happiness we share. And maybe that's the calculus of happiness, a rationale well known to ancient philosophers, familiar to our founding fathers, but distant to us as we speed ever faster and maybe inevitably at increasingly shallower depths into the future. We've had several resets on the theme already. Your orientation discussions on the 10 golden rules for living the good life, all of our first-year students went through that. The First Connections class introduced us to the theme. Some of you have had the chance to peruse Pope Francis's 10 Secrets to Happiness and Thomas Jefferson's 10 Rules for a Good Life. Many of you heard Father Byron, Sister Sheila, Dr. Jackson, and others who came to our campus and shared their thoughts on the topic. Well, we're going to let you hit that reset button one more time tonight. And it's up to us to take that discussion one step further, to plumb our own depths and find our way, if not to true happiness, at least to our own version of the good life and a meaningful existence. So welcome once again to this year on the good life, where we wrestle with themes with which the ancient Greeks first grappled over 2,000 years ago. And we're happy to have you all here this evening. It's now my pleasure and my honor to introduce a very special Olympian who is going to tell us about our speaker tonight. Stephen Boyza, would you join us?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Boyza, and I am a Special Olympics PA athlete and global messenger from Cambria County. I would like to thank President Foley and Mount Aloysius College for inviting me to speak. I have been involved with Special Olympics for 15 years. Special Olympics has provided me with the opportunity to participate in competitive sports, build friendships, and be trained as a global messenger so that I can share my story with others. Tonight, I am honored to introduce Dr. Timothy Shriver, Chairman of Special Olympics International and son of Special Olympics founder Eunice Kennedy Shriver. Special Olympics was started in Miss Shriver's backyard as a way to bring people with intellectual disabilities out of isolation and give them a chance to experience inclusive sports and social activities. From the first Special Olympics Games held in 1968 at Soldier Field in Chicago to now, the organization has grown to serve more than 4 million athletes in 170 countries, touching the lives of many. Dr. Shriver has taken his mother's vision of Special Olympics further than anyone could ever imagine. What started as just a summer day camp is now a global movement. That global movement is what we refer to as the Dignity Revolution. Special Olympics does not just promote tolerance of people with intellectual disabilities, but encourages acceptance and respect. On behalf of my fellow athletes in Cambria County, as well as all of Pennsylvania, I would like to thank Dr. Shriver coming here this evening to talk about his new book, Fully Alive, Discovering What Matters Most. Through Dr. Shriver's lifelong commitment and successful book, he is helping the general public to see how individuals like me have turned our seeming shortcomings into a power of our own. Through sports, we demonstrate our abilities. We become mentors for other athletes. We train to become coaches and officials. We also become spokespersons and leaders within our communities. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking and welcoming Dr. Timothy Shriver.
Let's hear it for Stephen. Come on, let's hear it. I can't hear you, Matt Aloysius. Come on. So I'm sitting next to Sister, and she's about 1 minute into your introduction, she said, "God bless him," about 14 times already. And then you finished, and she says, "May the Spirit be with you," trying to follow him. Stephen, that was beautiful. I would be more than delighted to sit down and say that the lecture on the good life has already been given tonight. And if there is anything you will remember 6 months or 2 years or 3 years from now, trust me, you've already seen it. I have all these jokes, which now, of course, I can't use because I'm just totally blown away by your remarks, Stephen. But when you said that this is a movement that is revealing that you have a power of your own, I hope everyone heard that. There was no charity, there was no pity, there was no sympathy in Stephen's, there was no disability, to be honest. Not an ounce. There was a power of your own, and in having the guts and the courage and the strength and the spirit to share it, you have changed a lot of us, deepened us, invited us to a different place, speaking for myself at least. So on the one hand, I want to congratulate you. On the other hand, I'm really pissed off because my remarks are nowhere near. That's not a good word, is it? I'm sorry. I'm just so thrown here. Anyway, thank you. Thank you, and thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you for taking off. I know some of you have finals, some of you have children, some of you have duties and responsibilities, some of you have many other things you could be doing. I appreciate you all coming here, coming to the Mount, for those of you who have come from a distance. Joining me. On the way out here, I was looking up the history of St. Aloysius, and I found out, I want to thank Michelle, I don't know where she's gone now, who came and drove me all the way from Washington, D.C. There she is in the back. We got to drive up together, and we were playing with Wikipedia, and we found out that Aloysius is actually, maybe you all know this, but Aloysius is the Latin name of an Italian young boy who was born. Do you all know what his name was in Italian? What Aloysius is in Italian? Luigi. So I thought, another way of putting it, I'm at St. Luigi's. And I think that would be kind of cool to have like a Luigi pub or something like that. I think it would bring some of the Italian flavor to the Mount. I thought that might be fun. But I want to thank you again, Michelle. I want to thank President Foley. We've talked several times today, and I can't get out of him admitting that he once was a rugby player. Maybe you all know this, that we once played rugby together. He once had knees that had not been operated on. He once had shoulders big as the walls of this room, and he once played a very vicious, mean, and competitive game of rugby, and I still miss it. I think it would be a great fundraiser. How many people would contribute to St. Luigi's in order to see him play rugby? Wouldn't you? An immediate boost in the alumni fund if you would just put on cleats and shorts, Mr. President. And I was also on the way over, someone said, you know, you can't not look like a Kennedy. You know, you just couldn't get away with it. And I was reminded of a story my uncle Ted told. He said he was down for the dedication of the first Bush Library down in Texas. And he got in, and he was in the hotel, and they was going up to the ballroom for a speaking program. And he got in, and a guy gets in the elevator with him with a big Texas, long, what do you call it, 10-gallon hat on, and a big silver belt buckle on his blue jeans. And he pushes the, 18, and my uncle Teddy's going up to 3. And the guy looks over at him, he says, anybody ever tell you you look like a Kennedy? And my uncle said, well, as a matter of fact, they have. And he said, that must piss you off, doesn't it? I'm using the same word again. I'm stuck on it. But it doesn't upset me. I'm happy to be here in some ways representing a family. A lot of people say in my family that you're one of them. Which one are you? Which one are you related to? And that used to upset me when I was in my teens and 20s, wanting my individuality. But at this stage in my life, I'm very proud to be part of a team and part of a family. So I want to try to build on Stephen's beautiful words and share a few thoughts on the good life, moral choices, as the title of this series includes. In an age of distraction, in an age of stress, in the age of selfies, what can we say about the moral life, about moral choices? Moral choices when I was a kid were all about what you ought to do, right from wrong, good from bad, things that you wanted to do, you were not supposed to do. The moral choice was almost always considered to be the thing you ought to do. The thing that you would be punished for not doing, either now or, God forbid, in the afterlife. There were a few sisters who would remind us of the ought of the moral life and the risk we ran, both to our present happiness as well as to our eternal happiness, were we not to choose the moral life, the moral choice, the right thing. I want to share a different perspective. I want to invite us to think that the moral life might need a little bit of a shift in focus, from ought to want. Isn't it possible that the moral life, the good life, happiness, as the President has invited us to reflect upon, is just as much about what we really want as what we ought to want? Isn't it possible that the moral life is not so much about duty, but about desire, real desire, the deepest desire, the part of desire that animates our lives? The great Jesuit Pedro Arrupe, some of you may have heard or read his work, has a beautiful prayer which I'm going to read a few lines from. He writes, "Nothing is more practical than finding God, than falling in love in a quite absolute way. What you are in love with, what seizes your imagination, will affect everything. It will decide what will get you out of bed in the morning, what you do with your evenings, how you spend your weekends, what you read, whom you know, what breaks your heart, and what amazes you, with joy and gratitude. Fall in love, stay in love, and love will decide everything." The moral life, animated, is it possible, by what seizes your imagination.
What amazes you with joy and gratitude? Another way of asking you the question for yourself: what seizes your imagination? What amazes you with joy and gratitude? What makes you feel fully alive? Many people I have asked, because it's the title of my book, so I have to hump it, right? Fully alive. And I ask people, what makes you feel fully alive? When were you last fully alive? What do you think would help you to be more fully alive? And I'm sorry to say, many people don't know. They pause, they take a deep breath, and very often they say, I'll need to think about that. What makes you tonight, each of you? Bring it to mind. Maybe you have a quick answer. Maybe you remember it was a time in your childhood. Maybe you remember it was a time recently. Maybe you are fully alive right now because of someone you're sitting next to, because of someone you hope to see, because of who you've become. Maybe fully alive is something you anticipate when you graduate, when you find the next prize in your life. But it seems to me, if we want to answer questions about goodness, about morality, we ought to know deep down what makes us feel fully alive. A friend of mine, a priest, once gave a homily asking a similar version of the question, and he remembered that in 1969, Graham Nash and Joni Mitchell, many of you are too young to remember either, but they were great classic singers of the 60s and 70s, and to some extent the 80s. They went out for coffee one morning in Santa Monica, and they went back to their house, and they wrote a very famous song of that era, and it goes, "Our house is a very, very, very nice house. It's 2 cats in the yard. Life used to be so hard. Now everything is easy because of you." For some people, maybe an image of that nice house, that beautiful gathering, that sense of peace and domestic bliss, maybe that's part of what would animate feeling fully alive. Or maybe it's the quote, I saw it up on the wall here, the coffee mug, you can pick it up and it says, dance as if no one's watching and sing as if no one's listening. And I can't remember what else is on there. Maybe you all have seen it. Maybe there's something like, if I could only be myself and not worry about what everybody's seeing me, if I could only dance, that's why people sing in the shower, right? They want to sing, but they want to sing where no one's listening, right? So they're not embarrassed. Maybe that feeling is about part of what would make you feel fully alive. But I hope it's not guilt, and I hope it's not morality in the old sense. I hope it's more imagination and love and amazement and joy. My own journey from ought to want, from duty to desire, took turns that I could never have expected. I was a little boy when my mother started the camp that Stephen spoke about. Children, about 100 coming into a big farm type property. They came mostly from institutions where they would have been labeled words that are too painful to even state today. Many orphaned, almost in the neonatal ward, where their mothers were told, their fathers were told, give up this child, move on with your life, don't worry, don't look back, pretend this never happened. Those children that the world had seen, had determined, had looked at and said, invalid, moron, retard. Those children that had been pushed away were all of a sudden in my backyard. And as far as I was concerned, I had 100 kids. We had kickball games every day. We had swimming races every day. All of a sudden, we had pony rides in my backyard. It was a bonanza. It wasn't duty. It wasn't responsibility. It wasn't guilt. It was fun, to be honest. Confusing a little bit. Some people I was playing with didn't necessarily speak the same way I was expecting people to. Some people had helmets on their heads. Some people's bodies moved in different ways. But we had a good time. Later on in my life, the journey took a different turn. In my 20s, searching still for that sense of being fully alive, I found myself confronting silence and being told, well, you're looking in the wrong places. You keep looking out there, the books told me. The centering prayer tradition told me. And all of a sudden, I discovered people like Meister Eckhart and Julian of Norwich, who was quoted earlier tonight, who said, God is at home, and you are in a faraway country. Or later, the same Eckhart wrote, the eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. And I was totally knocked off my horse. Never had I imagined that in the pursuit of silence, in the pursuit of unknowing, in the pursuit of self-emptying, that I wouldn't earn my way to finding what mattered most, that I would discover I already had it. That set me off on this question that Eckhart implies. If he says, as he does, the eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me, I thought to myself, how do I see like that? What would it take for me to tap, to realize, to use, to sharpen, to get the kinds of glasses I would need to see with my eye that saw the same way God saw? My goodness, what an invitation. And in some ways that led me back to the athletes of Special Olympics. One of my favorite stories from our movement that moved and changed me, it took place at one of our larger events. As Stephen said rightly, we have 4 million athletes. Last year, Stephen, you haven't seen this number because it's new, 80,000 Special Olympics games were held all over the world, in India and China and Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, places like Syria and all these countries, all over Latin America. 80,000 local games, but every 4 years we have the big one. And on this particular year, 1995, we were up at Yale Bowl, the old stadium, filled with 80,000 people, and the President Clinton at the time, became the first president to attend a Special Olympics opening ceremonies. And he came, but the security was porous at the Yale Bowl, so the Secret Service had him stay at the top row of the stadium when he was to give his speech. Down on the field, you've got 6,000 athletes from all over the world. They've just paraded in. They've all been given goodie bags and single-use cameras, the old kind, you know. Some of you may remember you used to get them at the drugstore. Does anybody? There was a time when there was no iPhone. I swear to God, it did happen. Anyway, down on the field, you've got 6,000 athletes. They've got their cameras. The president's at the top row. He begins his speech. One of the professional photographers who's volunteering looks over and he sees a delegation from one of the African nations. He can tell because it's very colorful outfits. And he looks at them and they're all trying to get a picture of the president. And he looks closer and he sees they've all got their cameras, but they're all backwards. So he realizes they've never used the camera before. They've come from a country, they've never used these devices before. So he goes over, not knowing if they speak English. You know, this is in the middle of a stadium with 80,000 people, right? He says, you're trying to get a picture of the president way up high. The athlete kind of gestures, and he says, you have to turn the camera around, then you push this button, and you look through this little hole. And the athlete says, oh. He says, thank you, but he says, if you look through the viewfinder backwards, it works like binoculars, and you can see the president perfectly clearly. Now, I love that story for many reasons. But the most powerful part of it to me is that the photographer, like so many of us, got it wrong. How many times do we look at one another and we just get it wrong? We miss each other. We miss who we are. We miss what's going on. He's a good man, the photographer. He's volunteer. He's not a bad guy. He's not a malicious person. He's not a bigot. He's not racist. I mean, as far as we know, he's just a good guy. But he thought he saw a disabled person. He assumed incompetence. He didn't assume creative use of a viewfinder. He didn't look beyond the surface. He couldn't see clearly. And you think to yourself, he came to volunteer to serve those athletes. But who received? And who gave? Who was seeing clearly? And whose lens needed a change? He couldn't yet see without judging, as so many of us can't see without judging. In so many ways, the experience of trying to learn about the moral choice, the good life, happiness, has come to me from people who have said to me over and over again, you've got to change your lens. You're not looking properly. Think of the athletes at Chicago, at Soldier Field, the first formal Special Olympics event. Again, 1,000 people, 20-some states in Canada come, most again from institutions. 1968, 3 months after the death of Dr. King, only less than 2 months after the death of my uncle. And there in Chicago Soldier Field comes the first Special Olympics event. All the athletes again. At this time, just by way of reference point, by 1968, the population of people with intellectual differences being put into institutions is growing, getting bigger. More people are moving their children into institutions at this stage in our history. So we're not on the decline, we're not at deinstitutionalization. Institutions are growing across the country. 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, 6,000, 8,000 person institutions growing. 15, 20, 30 people to a room. People in chains, tied, bound, medicated, growing. And in Soldier Field, we have 1,000 of these human beings, and they're told they're Olympic. And you have to assume a lot of people would have said, come on. That's a sweet line, but they're not. Let's be honest. Maybe that's a nice way of putting it. But Olympic is higher, faster, stronger, the biggest, the toughest, the most powerful. Rayford Johnson was on the field, fresh from having won the decathlon. The greatest athlete in the world. That's Olympic. These bedraggled children who nobody wanted, come on. The first day, a 400-meter race, 6 or 7 runners, unfortunately the names are lost now, go down the back stretch of Soldier Field, and they're running around for the full length of the track, and they're volunteers from different organizations, the Lions Clubs and the JCs and the Civitan, and people like that are down on the field volunteering, sisters down on the field volunteering, and they come down in the home stretch, and the athlete in first place is headed towards the finish line, and he stumbles and falls, wipes out. The other 6 athletes continue on, except the one who was in second place, who continues on and then stops and turns around and goes back and picks up his, as it turns out, best friend and puts his arm around his shoulder. And just stop yourself for a moment and imagine that's you, never having been seen anywhere in life, never having been appreciated, never having had a chance to run your race, never seeing the finish line, never being able to cross it, never being cheered. And that runner in second place sees that finish line, he's in the stadium, he's ready to cross it, and he stops. And he goes back and he crosses the finish line. In what place? Last place. Last place. Or first place. All of a sudden, we begin to see the way in which the voice, the experience, the power of people who see the world slightly differently saw that winning can also be looking out for your friend, even if it means you don't come in first. Healing a friendship, believing in a friendship, is another way of winning, and before you know it, all around the world, people with intellectual differences, disabilities, all of a sudden reveal that there is a way of winning without defeating anybody. A few years later, fast forward, and my wife Linda and I, we have 5 kids, and we're still trying to learn, and they're playing in what we call unified sports. I'd invite any of you who want, and I hope someday there'll be a unified sports team that will wear the colors and the mascot of Aloysius, of Mount Aloysius, and compete in interscholastic competition just like other teams. But at this point in life, my children are playing on our local unified team, and we're driving home one morning after practice. I've got my 2 sons in the car, and I'm thinking to myself, these boys, 12 and 14 years old, they're volunteering every Saturday morning. Why would they like this? I mean, the kids they're playing with, they're double dribbling and carrying the ball and missing the basket, and I'm thinking to myself, what am I putting my sons up for? Are they really getting something out of this? Or is it, God forbid, are they doing it out of guilt or duty? So I turned to the boys as we're driving along the highway on our way home from practice in the cold in February, and I say to them, what do you guys think of how this whole thing is going? Radio's blaring, and they're like, yeah, it's fine, Dad, it's fine. 3 men in a car. How much conversation can you hope for? And I say, no, I'm serious. I really want to know what do you think about this whole Special Olympics thing? Are you unified sports? Are you getting anything out of it? Yeah, it's fine, Dad. And I was looking at them. They're completely zoned out. So I turn off the radio. This is also an old device. Some of you may remember. It's called a radio. We used to use them a lot. But I turn it off, and they say, Dad, why are you turning off the radio? I was like, okay, because I'm asking you a serious question. I want to know what you think about this whole experience, this Special Olympics stuff. And so my son Sam says to me, Dad, you're so annoying. He says, but I'll explain it to you this way. He says, if you told me right now we're going to Disney World, I'd be the happiest person in the world. We'd go down there, it would be warm, we'd go on roller coasters, we'd have so much fun, we'd go on all the rides. And he said, there's only one problem. I have no idea what he's talking about right now. I'm just looking at him like, what are you talking about? There's only one problem. When it's over, it would be horrible. I have to come home, I got to go back to school, and I'm more depressed than before. Yeah, I get that, he says, when we go to Special Olympics, it's different. It's the kind of fun that lasts. Now turn the radio back on, Dad, The fun that lasts. What had he seen in that gym with double dribbling and people carrying the ball and shooting at the wrong end of the basket, and no fans, just a bunch of 10, 12, 14, 16-year-old kids playing together, that had already awakened his eye to know that there is one kind of fun that you get at Disney World, and we all like it. He didn't say he wouldn't have fun, but it's temporary, it's satisfaction. But there's another kind that is not. What had he seen in that place about being around others without any judgment? No bias. I think he sort of thought to himself, wow, that's a different kind of fun. That doesn't have to stop. You can take it with you wherever you go. You could have it right here. You could look to your left and your right and say, I'm having the kind of fun that lasts, if you felt that way. My final story in these lessons. So if Chicago was that there's a way of winning that's about friendship, if Sam's lesson was there's a way of having fun that can last, Donald Page's lesson was still more powerful for me. Donald was a little boy in Ireland, born to a family. Dad is a dairy farmer, mom is a mom, 8 children. Healthy little boy until he was about 18 months when he got a very serious disease which resulted in a powerful fever that spiked on Good Friday afternoon. And his parents took him down to the doctor sent him to the hospital, and within 2 hours he was being administered the last rites of the church. He survived that night only to have the same attack of fever and sepsis to overtake his body, his little tiny less than 2-year-old body the next day, and again he was administered the last rites of the church, but he survived. And his mother took him home to raise him. He became unable to move, unable to control his hygiene, unable to eat, and she dedicated her every day to Donald, her little boy. When it came time for us to have our big celebration in Dublin, we were there at Croke Park on 2003. The PSNI, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, marched into Croke Park for the first time in history, together with the Gardaí, the police force of the Republic of Ireland. Historic moment. Bono sang, Mandela spoke, Muhammad Ali entertained people, Pierce Brosnan paraded in the parade, river dancers. And 3 days later, I get a call from the President of Ireland, Mary McAleese, saying she'd like to go out and look at some of the competition. Would I escort her? And I thought, my God, what a huge honor. I'd be thrilled and honored. Let's go to the track. We have terrific athletes at track. In fact, we have athletes at track who could compete in the Olympics. Most people don't realize that. And I thought, I am going to take her there, and she's going to see these sprinters doing hundreds in 10.5 and 11 seconds. She's going to see people running the mile in under 4 minutes. I mean, we're going to blow her away. And the assistant says, well, no, she's decided she'd like to go to the motor activities, which is close to her office. Motor activities, I said, that's the competition for people with the most severe challenges. Almost everyone in a wheelchair, almost everyone nonverbal, almost everyone unable to walk. And so the tasks are the most simple possible tasks. Pushing a ball off a ramp, lifting a foam ball, moving a beanbag. I thought that's not going to work. I want to impress her with our athletes. I want her to see people who can do extraordinary things like Stephen did today. Though they insisted she'll meet you there at 10 at the motor activities. Now, the motor activities in Dublin was in a room almost exactly this size. And I met the president at I got there at 9 o'clock, we waited, we met her at the door, we escorted her in, and she sat down right here where Stephen is sitting, and I'm right next to her. And the first person to come out was Donald Page. He was at this time 18 years old. He'd left on the wheelchair van at about 5 in the morning from his house in the southern central part of Ireland. His parents had left in their separate car to give him a chance to go with his teammates to Dublin for the first time where he would compete in the beanbag lift. And there was a riser, just one of the small ones, maybe just a foot off the ground. And the miracle of the place, at least at the moment, as I could discern it was packed. Many of our venues are not packed, but this particular venue, through the grace of God and the goodness of the people of Dublin, was swarming with people. Don't ask me how they came, but they were all there to watch motor activities. And Donald was wheeled out like this, and his wheelchair was placed just like this. His coach was with him, and his coach stood back, and I'm sitting there where Stephen is, and I'm watching the coach. And she keeps sort of going back, but if you could see an energy field, like if you had like one of those Star Trek sensors, you would have seen like a huge tube of positive energy flowing from this woman to this young man, who now has a tray in front of him, and a beanbag is placed on the right side, or where I'm sitting, the right side of the tray. And the announcer says, off you go. And Donald Page takes in the room, he looks around, he sort of has a little bit of a smile on his face, and then he goes to lift this bag. And the room is silent like it is now. And you can watch him trying to move his arm, and it won't go. His body moves, but his hand won't go. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh my gosh. And there's a pin drop. This goes on for a minute and a half. That pause I just gave you was about less than 10 seconds. And then slowly at about a minute and a half, the fingers start to move just a little bit. And at about 4 minutes, his hand finally falls onto that bag. And a cheer comes out of the crowd. "There you go, lad," someone says in the back. And Donald Page gets his hand on that beanbag. And over the course of the next 12 minutes, his hand comes across like this. Now the crowd starts to go crazy. And I interviewed his dad later. And his dad said to me, "You know, every time I took Donald to a doctor," he said, "I even took him to a doctor all the way in Dublin. And they would always be telling me what Donald couldn't do. Donald won't do this and Donald won't do that. And I always was after saying to the doctors, just give him a bit of time. He can do more than you think." And his dad said to me, "I just knew if those people in Dublin would give him a bit of time, he could do it." Donald Page put that beanbag down at the 18-minute mark. And the crowd explodes. I mean, Final Four on steroids. Screaming, I'm standing, screaming. The president is standing, screaming. I look over at her, there are tears streaming down her face. I have tears streaming down my face. And I thought to myself, I still got it wrong. You know, I had thought it would have been better to take her to the track. I thought it would have been better to see someone who runs the 100 in 10.5 than to see Donald. I had it wrong. I had never seen, and to this day still have never seen, an athletic performance that comes close to matching the courage and the strength and the power of Donald Page. You know, the line, everybody is watching, or you're singing and nobody's listening, or you're dancing and no one's watching. Not Donald. He was dancing and everybody was watching. But he succeeded in trusting all those people enough to think they wouldn't judge him, that they wouldn't call him a name, that they wouldn't say what he couldn't do, that they'd give him a bit of time. And with a bit of time, he could show the world what excellence really is. You know, excellence isn't me beating you, or you beating me, or me getting an A and you getting a B, or me getting ahead of you. It's not. It's a ridiculous definition. We bought into it as a culture. We think it's better morally to beat the other person. People might even say it. Even educators would say it. Excellence is only doing your best. That's the only definition that makes any sense whatsoever. And yet, how many of us, if tomorrow you found yourself in a wheelchair, if tomorrow you found yourself losing your ability to speak, if tomorrow you found yourself unable to move your arms, if tomorrow you found yourself unable to measure up in school, how many would say, put me in front of the room? I'm ready. I'm still ready to do what I can do the best I can. How many people believe that it's okay to just do your best? How many of us understand that? I don't think the moral life, the good life, is defined by so much our house is a very nice house, the walls are up, the domestic situation is bliss. We all love those moments, yes we do. But as my friend who gave that homily said, the better definition is a different song that came out that same year, Born to Be Wild. We live in an age where selfies and distraction, where competition and loneliness are epidemic. We want people to get more and more information. The moral life is about transformation. We want people to achieve and get to places that will make them happier. The moral life is about understanding that the place where you already are has everything it needs. We want people to do all these things to earn value. The moral life is about accepting that you've already got it. In so many ways, it's a complete reversal of all the things the world tells us. Maybe that's why they call it conversion. You don't earn anything of lasting value. You've already got it. And until you and I actually believe that, we will never feel, in my view, fully alive. The great Special Olympics athlete Frank Stevens from the state of Virginia, articulate self-advocate, much like the great Stephen you heard tonight, was challenged 2 years ago when a political commentator, Ann Coulter, referred to the President of the United States in the last election as a retard. Frank wrote an op-ed piece asking her to understand that the use of that language, regardless of her political persuasion, was hurtful to people and painful in that it carried a very ugly past with it and was often used to humiliate. Frank's op-ed did not result in her responding. She refused to either take his call or discuss it with him, but he became a huge sensation on social media. And so one night, Piers Morgan, the former CNN host, invited him on to talk about his fight, if you will, with Ann Coulter. She refused to join the show. And at the end of the show, Piers Morgan looked at Frank and said, "Frank, if you could say anything to Ann Coulter, what would you say?" Frank has Down syndrome. He's 4'11 and 1/2 inches, which he will remind you if you say 4'11, it's not true. He's 4'11 and a half. He has a beautifully happy countenance, and he looked up and he said, "I would say thank you for giving me 3 million friends on Facebook." Later that same year, we were up on Capitol Hill, lobbying for support for people with intellectual differences, including higher ed support. And it had been a tough day, didn't get very far, didn't get very many good meetings, but we had a little reception at the end of the day, and a few senators and congressmen came by. Steny Hoyer and Roy Blunt, Republicans and Democrats, came by to congratulate the Special Olympics athletes who had spent the day knocking on doors on Capitol Hill. And one of the people who came by was, at that point, a congressman, my cousin Patrick. And Patrick got up and got very animated. He said, "We have a big problem. The NIH is putting all of its money into identification and early, and the identification of genetic syndromes and early identification, but nothing on treatment and care." And the message wasn't so subtle. The medical establishment, Patrick was saying, is pushing towards eliminating these disorders, and the implications of that are quite terrifying if you have one. So Patrick finished, and I said at the end of the night, "Would anyone like to speak?" Frank raised his hand and came up, and the podium looked almost just like this, and Frank was just over the top of it. And he said, "I want to thank my mother and my father. I want to thank my coaches. I want to thank all of the congressmen and the senators." And then he said, "I heard what Patrick said." And he said, "I want to say one other thing." And he looked up, and his glasses are down towards the bottom of his nose, but he looked strong, and he looked ahead, and he said, "My life is worth living. My life is worth living. My life is worth living." To me, that's the secret of the moral life. Arupe said, fall in love with God. Fall in love in an unconditional way. Not just fall in love with someone or something, but actually, as crazy as it sounds, fall in love with all things, all people, unconditionally. Recognize the Spirit in each of us, and let that animate your every choice. Let that animate your every decision from a place of depth, from a place of silence, from a place of humility, from a place of simplicity. You will choose the moral choice. You don't need to be told, and you don't need duty, and you don't need another lecture. But thank you all for listening to this one, and thank you, St. Aloysius, Mount Aloysius. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So we have, we're done?
We'll take a couple questions.
Oh, we'll take a couple questions. That's what I thought. I know I ran over a little bit, so I apologize for that. I'd be happy, yes.
I recently wrote a paper on digitization. What, in your opinion, is the greatest obstacle to that goal, and how do you foresee a path to overcoming it?
So I think, great question. What's the path to overcoming stigma, basically? What's the path to overcoming its manifestation? Bullying, exclusion, labeling. What's the path to overcoming finger pointing, pity, condescension, humiliation? It is a gigantic problem. And people with intellectual differences, I mean, I prefer the word diffability, because anything that starts with a dis, you automatically are concluding the language is setting you back. But if I say diff, how many people have different abilities? Everybody has to raise their hand, right? How many people have some abilities that are better than others? Everybody has to raise their hand. How many people can do some things well and not other things well? Everybody has to raise their hand. So there's a lot of barriers that have created the stigma that we currently deal with. So what's my solution? My solution is I think we need a whole revamping of the way in which we educate children. We want children to be forgiving. We don't teach forgiveness. We want children to be understanding of difference. We don't teach understanding of difference. We want children to be self-aware. We don't teach silence. Every religious tradition in the world has a practice of silence that I've been able to discover. How many religious schools, forget religious institutions, actually invite and teach silence? I don't mean to 16 or 20 or 30-year-olds. I don't mean mindfulness for kids here. I mean for 4-year-olds. 6-year-olds, 8-year-olds. You want children to be self-aware, you have to give them silence. You just have to, there's no other way. So I think we need to teach peace. We teach war like crazy. Everybody in this room can name all the generals of the Civil War. How many people can name the great peace leaders of the 20th century? How many people know who led the peace protests in Denmark that kept the Nazis from overtaking? Nobody, none of us. I didn't learn any of them. How many people know Ulysses Grant? How many people know Dorothy Day? I mean, the numbers are crazy disproportionate. We don't teach Dorothy Day. We don't teach nonviolence. We don't teach peace building. So I think we've got to, I like to think of it as a school of the heart. That word comes from St. Bernard of Clairvaux, who called monasteries schools of the heart. And in their roots, the religious traditions in a way were designed to sharpen, to refine, to deepen the sense of understanding that comes from the heart or the soul. But now we educate children as though they're like little cranial machines that move through an assembly line, and we latch on mathematics, and then we latch on the periodic table, and then we latch on a little bit of punctuation, and here's where the period goes, and here's where the comma goes. And we expect them to learn that way, how to get along with one another, how to look at one another with open eyes, how to understand the difference between winning by defeating and winning by doing your best. We don't teach any of it. So everything else is makeup. You know, we can use public awareness campaigns, billboards. We do all this. We make movies. We put people like Lauren Potter on television shows like Glee. We try to reverse the role models. We try to, all that. I mean, and we will continue to do it. We will continue to invite Stephen to speak anywhere that will listen to him and his many, many fellow heroic Global messengers, think of the title. We use that title deliberately. A messenger. Did you get the message? Right? So we have to do all this, but in general, I don't know about here, but in general, most schools, most places, I don't know how many of you would say this, but in most audiences like this, more than half of the people have never heard a person with an intellectual disability give a speech. None. Now again, I'm just guessing that at least half of you have never heard that. So that's not the way it should be. I mean, we all should have heard that when we were 6. We should hear it again when we're 8. We should play on teams that are inclusive when we're 7 and 9 and 11. And then we wouldn't grow up getting to the point where we end up someplace in our 20s or 30s or 40s, God forbid 50s and 60s, still excluding people out of ignorance and fear. Because most stigma is rooted in ignorance and fear. We wonder why we have intolerance, religious difference, race is back. To the extent it ever left. I mean, what do we need to do to realize that, we wanted to desegregate schools in the 50s, so we say, well, let's put all the kids of color and all the kids who are not of color, we'll put them in school together and everything will be fine. They'll just sit there across them, they'll look at each other, and all of a sudden, racism's going to go away. Are you kidding? I mean, does anybody have any degree? I mean, I should say this to white folks. White folks in general have no appreciation of the depth of racism and how deeply ingrained it is in the culture. I mean, we just don't see it. It's just an incredible blind spot. So anyway, it's a long answer. We have to do a lot of things differently. And I'd start with the kindergarten. Yes.
You conclude your book with a clarion call of sorts. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, there's a castle close by that only you can attack. All it takes is a willingness to enter the game and believe. Just by playing, you'll surely win, the medal that matters most. How can we inspire others to answer the call to attack when some of us might not know what castle we're attacking in the first place?
Good question. As my kids say that to me, so I'm sorry you asked that, because it's a very difficult question. So, two things. First, we do place a premium, and I do make this mistake, I would say it's a mistake in the book, to act as though everybody knows what their passion really is. And most, again, could do this by a show of hands. If we were honest, a lot of people don't know what their passion is. Like, they're like, I'm taking English, I'm taking math, maybe I'll be a nursing major, maybe I won't, I don't know. That this is a good job, I should do it because it's a good job. Passion, who knows? So we've made ourselves a little bit of a trap, and in particular because finding your passion in most discussions is a very individual pursuit. Historically, passion was not individual. Passion was tribal. Passion was collective. Passion was our passion, not just my passion. It wasn't as though you and I would have different passions. We would have the same, a shared passion. Passion was joining yourself to something bigger than yourself. And I think we've lost that. Again, selfie culture, individualization culture, the sort of almost the deification of the individual as the center of meaning. I think the place to go to find the castle that is your castle is to join. It sounds so pathetically obvious or stupid or almost infantile, but there's so many wonderful things in the world that need joiners. And you don't have to say, I really want to educate children in Kenya. That's my passion. But there may be an organization desperate for you that wants to educate children in Kenya, or educate children in Pittsburgh, or clean the stream, or whatever it is. I think part of passion comes from being together. In some ways, the Catholic tradition did this well. It always told us it was us. It wasn't me. We had to do it. It was the church. The church is this big, giant collective. We kind of move along in this massive sort of team of people. We join. So I think the level of despair and loneliness in the world is it's heartbreaking. We got to be honest. I travel, I mean, one of the great honors of my position is that I get to visit people all over the world who are some of the most extraordinarily holy and generous and courageous people in the world. But I tell you, the struggles they face are heartbreaking. I mean, I have sometimes come home, I got to just take a breath. I mean, so the world needs you. I mean, desperately. Your roommates need you. I mean, we're all so stressed out. Maybe the castle in front of you is sitting next to you. Maybe it's just a relationship that just somebody wants to be seen or heard. You know, maybe Stephen should come back and talk to your class, and you'll find that, wow, when he comes back and talks to your class, a whole new level of understanding comes. And so, you know, Gandhi knew what he wanted to be when he was 8, and Steven Spielberg ran around when he was 6 with a movie camera. Okay, but most of us, that didn't happen. Most of us just look at where we are and look across at someone else, and almost always see someone who's desperate to be seen, and sometimes just looking at them and not missing them is storming a big castle. Yes?
So I've been lucky enough to travel with the college twice to Guyana, South America, and actually some of my tripmates are sitting here. And the greatest opportunity that at least I had there was to go to a school for intellectually challenged and deaf students. And it's honestly something that's stuck with me so long. So I was wondering if there was a time where you went to a different country and you had like a special experience that has always carried with you. I know you spoke about Ireland, but
Yeah. I mean, I have so many. I have to tell you, this book was originally almost twice the length, just FYI, even if you don't read it. Look at it, it's long already. So I have a lot of stories. I'll close with one because it affected me. It's maybe not so relevant to everybody here, but it was sort of hit me in a special way. I was in South Africa, and we were doing a lot of events, including an event with President Mandela and others. It was quite remarkable, and many new people were coming into the movement and getting started and getting a lot of momentum to grow the Special Olympics movement in the former homelands and places like Soweto and so on. We went to an institution there and so on. Anyway, at one point I went out to a small institution about 20 miles outside of Cape Town, again for people with very severe challenges. And one of our coaches, one of our volunteers had arranged to have, again, a motor activities day, as it turns out, same event. And so we go, this institution is very poor and the floors are concrete, and you know, most people, if you walk down, they're sitting on the floor and barely clad. I mean, very grim, to be honest. But we had in the all-purpose room, they had arranged to have these activities, and so we went in to watch, and one of the residents brought in a little pretend flame, and we started, and I was sitting in a folding chair, and next to me was one of the residents, very severely disabled, who's, you know, in a chair with, you know, a neck brace and so on. And sitting next to him was his mother. I could tell it was his mother because she was scratching his neck the whole time, you know, and like rubbing him like this, you know, rubbing his arm and stuff like that. And we're watching, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm going to get a chance to meet in the next couple days with the mayor and all these other different officials. So I said to her, you know, my name is Tim, and I'm here, and I wondered if you could give me some insight. What could we do? What could be done differently in South Africa for people with intellectual challenges and so on? She said, nothing is fine. She's scratching her son's arm and rubbing his neck and stuff like this, and I'm looking at her, and I mean, it's very tender. You know, and I'm embarrassed again to tell the story because I was so intrusive. It was almost like I was intruding, but I was so determined, you know, to get a good story to tell when I went to meet with, you know, officials and all that kind of stuff. And I said to her, no, but seriously, I said, you know, I'm sure, you know, this institution itself needs help, and it doesn't have very much resources, and the conditions here are not that great. What would you recommend be done differently? And she said, Mr. Shriver, Mr. Shriver, I can still hear her voice. We're fine. We're fine. Daniel and my son Daniel and I are fine. And I said, well, I mean, I know you're fine, ma'am, but there's problems in this country. And she turned to me and she said, Mr. Shriver, Daniel has taught me a lesson most parents never learn. He's taught me the meaning of unconditional love. Mr. Shriver, we are fine. And I looked at her and her son, and I have to say, I thought to myself, I don't know if I learned that lesson. I mean, I have, at that time, 4 children. And I wasn't sure I understood what she was talking about. I could say the words. If you ask my kids, do I love them unconditionally, I would answer yes. They would, I think, answer yes. But I'm not sure. I think she's right. Most parents never learn. And I think most of us don't learn the difference between earning somebody's love and working to get love and feeling like you deserve to be loved because you've done something versus unconditional love. And they're not the same. And one is worth learning more than the other. And I thank her for at least reminding me that it was something that I would do well to think more about and pray on and try to understand. So, thank you. Stephen, will you have the last word? No, sit down, Mr. President. Stephen, will you come up here? I know who the closer is here. Come on, Stephen. Now, you already have something to say, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. I could tell.
Thank you, Dr. Shriver, for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you.